So I'd like to congratulate the Minister on this wonderful bill, and I commend it to the House.
I call Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I take a slightly different approach to many of the members who have spoken on this bill this evening, and that I don't necessarily see the Television New Zealand Charter being the panacea for quality public broadcasting in New Zealand. I don't think it ever was. I don't think TVNZ has been a public service television broadcaster for quite some time, and I don't think that we have seen the quality public broadcasting television content that New Zealanders should be able to expect for a very, very long time. And I think that that's a real tragedy. What I'm concerned about, however, is the direction that we're going in with public television broadcasting in New Zealand, and that to some extent we seem to have just given up on the idea altogether. And I'll give the House a really good example of that, Mr Speaker, and that is TVNZ Heartland. 100% New Zealand content, relying on content that's been built up over a number of years, quite often with taxpayer subsidies through New Zealand On Air. Some great television programming there. It's available on TVNZ Heartland, but only if you can afford the Sky TV subscription. So increasingly what we're seeing, and we're seeing it with KidZone as well, TVNZ KidZone as well, that TVNZ is producing some good local television if you can afford to get a Sky TV subscription. So it's not a public broadcaster, it's not a free-to-air broadcaster. In fact, it's increasingly becoming a content provider for Sky Television. And I think that the real question that we have to ask ourselves is that the role of New Zealand's public service television broadcaster to simply provide content for a pay TV service? The Sky TV arguably is the most profitable broadcaster in the country, television broadcaster in the country, and yet our TVNZ, the state-owned public television network, seems to be increasingly focusing its attention on providing content for the most profitable television operator in the country. And I don't think that's right. Now, I don't think that the Charter was perfect. I don't think that you know, that we got all that right. I think there were definitely some improvements needed to be made, but this goes the other way. What it does is it abandons any notion of public service broadcasting, television broadcasting in New Zealand, and says, let's just focus on making a buck. Well, actually, the best way to make a buck would be to put all of Television New Zealand's content on Sky TV. Because then, because Sky TV is profitable. Television New Zealand, it's profitable at the moment, but with the way technology's going, the increasing market dominance of Sky TV, that may not necessarily be the case for much longer. With the segmentation of the market, the platform is going to become a lot less important than the content. And what we're seeing with the content, the New Zealand-made content, often paid for by New Zealand On Air or through TVNZ's previous charter funding, that content that's been built up over those years is now available only if you can afford a Sky TV subscription. I don't think that's right. I think New Zealanders have paid for this content. They should be able to watch it. And this bill frees up the content prior to 1989. Frees it up for whom is the question that I would ask. Frees it up so that we can get even more of those New Zealand stories and that New Zealand content on Sky TV, where you have to pay to watch it? That would be a concern for me. If it frees it up so that we can actually get it on free-to-air TV, on the Freeview platform, so that all New Zealanders can see it, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, what is TVNZ going to be in the future? If it is simply going to be another commercial TV network providing nothing that's any different to what you'll get on TV3, Prime TV, Sky TV, then actually we have to ask what the fundamental purpose of having Television New Zealand at all really is. Because what we need to see in New Zealand, if we're going to have a distinctive New Zealand television service, it needs to reflect New Zealand. It needs to tell New Zealand stories, and Television New Zealand doesn't do that. And in fact, what we're seeing from Television New Zealand at the moment is an abandonment of anything south of the Bombay Hills. In my electorate, we have Avalon TV studios, widely recognised as the best television studios in the country. The technology in Avalon Studios is the best, most up-to-date technology that's available there. You talk to anybody there, including TVNZ's current management in Auckland, and they will admit that the studios in Avalon are world-leading. The people that work at that are fantastic, and I want to pay tribute to the staff who work at Television New Zealand's Avalon Studios, who in a few months' time are going to find themselves out of work as TVNZ abandons the rest of the country and focuses all of its content on Auckland, produces all of its content in Auckland and simply abandons the rest of New Zealand. Pretty soon, the only way you're going to be able to be on television if you live outside of Auckland is going to be to get on the news, because the rest of New Zealand's television content is being produced in Auckland, and I think that's a real shame. And it's what's even more disastrous is those absolutely fantastic studio facilities at Avalon now are simply going to be abandoned because TVNZ does not seem to have any credible plan to sell them as a going concern. What they're going to do is they're going to wait till the Racing Board's current lease on the studio facilities expires. They're going to wait till lotteries stop doing the lotto draws there. Then they're going to try and sell them. In other words, they're going to try and sell an empty TV studios with no customers. Well, no one's going to want to buy that. So TVNZ, they're dragging their heels, they're dragging this process. Part of the reason, of course, is they don't want their competitors to get hold of it. TVNZ don't have a plan to sell it as a going concern. They don't have any plan for it. So the most likely thing is it's just going to become another empty lot in the Hutt Valley for a property developer to buy. And frankly, we've got enough of those in the Hutt Valley as a result of this government closing just about every other government department or agency in the Hutt Valley. We've got enough of those already. We don't need another one at Avalon when we have a perfectly good TV studio facility there that has in the past produced some of the best New Zealand television content available. Finally, I want to pick up the points made by Te Aroha Flavel from the Māori Party. And I think he raised some really legitimate concerns about who we see on our TV screens. Is Māori culture and identity reflected on our TV screens? And I would argue, actually, that Māori do quite well because they have a Māori television service. And I believe that the Māori television service is far closer to being a public television broadcasting service for New Zealand than Television New Zealand is or has ever been, and certainly as far back as I can remember. I think the Māori television do an absolutely fantastic job of providing quality public content. They do it at a relatively low price. It's not highbrow television, as the members opposite would think. It just reflects New Zealand. It's genuine New Zealand content. And I think that's what New Zealanders want to see, our public broadcaster. They want to see Television New Zealand delivering that. It shouldn't only be on Māori television. It should actually reflect all of New Zealand's many cultures and identities and communities, and increasingly it does not. And so I think that's an absolute disgrace. I think all New Zealanders should be able to see themselves reflected on screen, because if we don't, if we're simply going to say to Television New Zealand, just be like any other broadcaster, import as much content from overseas as they want to do, then what we're saying is actually there's no distinctive... We're saying that it'll be the end to Television New Zealand, effectively, because there'll be nothing to differentiate them from anyone else, and they probably can't do it as cheap as other commercial public broadcasters can do it. In fact, a lot of the content produced by TVNZ at the moment, TV3, are producing similar content, but a cheaper price. So if you look at the overhead cost of TVNZ News, for example, it's actually much, much more significant than the cost of producing TV3 News, and yet the volume is probably about the same for both. So the question we have to ask is, if we're not going to have Television New Zealand as a public content broadcaster, what is Television New Zealand going to be? Because if it's just going to be another commercial broadcaster, what's the point of having it? But see, the thing is, I suspect that's where this government are going. I suspect that they're going to come back to this House maybe in the next term of Parliament, if they get the chance, if they get re-elected, which is looking increasingly slimmer by the day. If they get that chance to come back here, they're going to come back to this House and they're going to say, hang on a minute, Television New Zealand's no different to TV3, no different to Sky TV, let's just hock it off. We'll just add it to the list along with all the energy companies and everything else. Let's just hock it off, and that's exactly what the government's agenda to do. They want to make it look and feel as much like a private, regular commercial broadcaster as possible, so that they can hock that off. The which team? There is no such thing. There is no such thing, Mr. Speaker. None of the government members seem to be willing to engage in the real issue of the moment, which is why we don't have a public television broadcaster in this country. They don't have a vision for public broadcasting. They don't want to see New Zealanders represented on New Zealand screens. They don't have a plan. Another example of where they don't have a plan for pretty much anything, and as a result, New Zealanders are suffering. Mr. Speaker, I finally want to conclude my remarks simply by saying that we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity to actually draw a line under everything that's happened in the past and actually institute something that's about genuine public broadcasting in this country. The government have missed the opportunity to do that. Instead, what they're doing is simply turning Television New Zealand into just another set of broadcasters that you're going to have to pay money to watch, and I think that's a disgrace.
Call Jonathan Young.
Somebody once said there's no such thing as a free lunch.